Imagine you're driving your car and the check engine light starts flashing, like glaringly red on your dashboard.
Right.
And this does this for 6 straight weeks.
Right.
But you just ignore it. You keep driving.
As we all do sometimes, but yeah, bad idea.
Right. And then you act completely shocked, totally blindsided, when the engine just seizes up, starts smoking, and the car completely breaks down on the highway.
Yeah. I mean, we would never actually do that with a car.
No. But looking at the stack of notes and the research we're digging into today for you, that is precisely the operational model we use for K-12 student mental health in this country.
It's a completely absurd scenario when you frame it around a vehicle, but it accurately reflects a profoundly broken system.
Exactly.
So today we are analyzing this massive paradigm shift in education. We're going to unpack the critical transition from this really outdated crisis response model to a highly functional crisis prevention model.
And we aren't just talking about abstract theories here, right?
No, not at all. We are looking at the actual operational mechanics of how this is achieved on the ground. Specifically, we're examining a program operating in Georgia called MentalSpace School.
Right, because our mission for you today, listening to this deep dive, is to really get past the buzzwords. We want to understand the architecture of this shift.
Yeah, the nuts and bolts of it.
Because currently, we are culturally conditioned to treat school mental health exactly like an emergency room.
Right, like we were just saying, you only go when something is disastrously wrong.
When the sirens are blaring and, the damage is already done, we are literally treating the explosion instead of the engine light.
We really are. But to understand why a preventative care clinic model is necessary, we first have to dismantle a very specific, comforting myth that our society really clings to.
Oh, the comforting myth. This is where it gets interesting.
Yeah, that myth is really the foundation of the old system. The comforting story we tell ourselves, and you see this narrative repeated constantly after a school tragedy, is that crises come completely out of nowhere.
Right. Like nobody could have seen it coming.
Exactly. We tell ourselves that nothing could have been done and that absolutely no one could have known it was going to happen.
Which, honestly, is a psychological defense mechanism.
Oh, 100%.
A crisis is just this random, unpredictable lightning strike. Then no one is to blame.
Yeah.
You can't predict a lightning strike, so, you're absolved of responsibility.
Right. It completely removes the burden of culpability from the community, from the administration.
Yep.
But the reality is entirely different. The data in our sources shows that this comforting story is almost entirely false.
Wait, entirely false?
Pretty much, yeah. Student crises rarely, if ever, happen in a vacuum. They usually have highly visible warning signs.
Okay, visible warning signs. Like what?
Well, the sources specifically list these out, and these signs don't just appear like hours before an event. They are visible weeks or even months before the crisis itself actually hits the boiling point.
Right, and we aren't talking about abstract, invisible psychological phenomena that only a trained psychiatrist could spot.
No. We are talking about observable external behaviors.
Like a sudden withdrawal from friends or extracurricular activities.
Exactly. Or noticeable changes in sleep patterns.
Like a kid just constantly falling asleep in second period.
Right. Distinct personality shifts, a sudden unexplained increase in risk-taking behavior, or even indirect statements to peers that something is fundamentally wrong.
Okay, when you lay it out like that, you realize these are external data points.
Yes, exactly.
These are behavioral signals that teachers, parents, and peers are actively witnessing in real time. Which brings me to a massive question. And I think you listening might be wondering the exact same thing.
Which is?
If these signs are there for weeks or months, are we just blind? Going back to the dashboard analogy, we see the glowing red light.
Right.
Why aren't people acting on the signs? Are teachers just ignoring a kid who is clearly spiraling?
That is the pivotal question, honestly. And it leads us directly to the true bottleneck of the entire mental health crisis in schools.
Yep.
Because the missing element in our current system is not recognition.
Wait, it's not.
No. Teachers see the glowing red light. Parents see the glowing red light.
So what's the gap then?
The gap, the fatal flaw in the system, is the lack of a fast pathway.
A fast pathway. Okay, let's break down what that actually means mechanically.
So a fast pathway is the logistical bridge from a teacher or a parent saying, I notice something is wrong with this student, to actually getting that student sitting in front of a licensed clinician.
Right.
Think about the old model, the emergency room model.
Okay, yeah.
A teacher notices the withdrawal or the risk-taking. They do their job. They make a report.
Right, they flag it.
Then that report goes to an overloaded school counselor who has like 400 other students.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Then maybe an email goes home to the parents.
And this is where it turns into a bureaucratic escape room.
A bureaucratic escape room. That is the perfect phrase for it.
Right. Because the parents receive that email, and suddenly they have to navigate their employer's insurance, find a therapist who's actually taking new patients.
Hold up with that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Figure out if they're in network, and then if they're lucky, book an appointment for 3 months out.
Yep.
And after all that, they just have to hope their teenager actually agrees to go.
Right. That bureaucratic escape room is the friction. And that friction is exactly where the student falls through the cracks.
Because it's just too hard.
Exactly.
Right.
The crisis doesn't happen because nobody noticed. The crisis happens in that 3-month waiting period. The anxiety compounds, the depression deepens, and the engine finally seizes.
Wow. So the breakdown isn't a lack of awareness at all. It's just a massive bureaucratic traffic jam.
Basically, yeah.
That completely changes how we have to solve the problem. We don't need more awareness campaigns. We need better logistics.
Better logistics, exactly. Which brings us to the specific operational traits of school districts that actually manage to close this gap.
Right, the ones that are getting it right.
Yeah. Districts that show measurable, tangible improvements in student safety share 3 main pillars when building this fast pathway.
Okay, let's get into these pillars.
The first 2 traits go hand in hand: systems and speed.
Systems and speed.
First, successful districts have robust early warning systems. This means the staff isn't just, relying on intuition.
Right.
They are systematically trained to recognize those exact behavioral signals we talked about. And crucially, they have a perfectly clear, unambiguous referral path.
So they aren't just sending an email into the void.
Right. They know exactly which button to push the moment they see the check engine light. And they know that pushing it triggers an immediate response, not an email to a black hole.
And then comes the speed part, which is trait number 2. The sources call this same-day access.
Yes, absolutely no wait time. 0.
0 wait time.
The moment the problem is recognized, the student is connected with a clinician.
Okay, wait, I have to push back on
Go
this.
for it.
Same-day access. How is that mathematically or logistically possible? There's a well-documented nationwide shortage of child psychologists and therapists.
Yeah, there is.
Are we just talking about a glorified crisis hotline where a kid texts a random volunteer? Or is this actual clinical therapy?
It's a completely valid skepticism.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's the hurdle most administrators stumble over when they first hear about this.
Because it sounds too good to be true.
Right. But it is actual clinical therapy. The mechanism that makes it possible is integrated telehealth.
Ah, telehealth, okay.
Yeah. By removing the geographic constraints of having a physical therapist drive to a school or, a parent driving a kid across town in rush hour traffic, you open up the bandwidth.
That makes sense.
But it's not a random call center. We'll get into the architecture of how programs like MentalSpace School do this in a moment. But the core philosophy is that the elimination of the wait time is the critical mechanism of prevention.
Right. I mean, it makes total sense. Having a state-of-the-art fire alarm is completely useless if the fire truck takes 3 months to arrive.
That's a great way to put it.
The speed itself is the safety net. You aren't just giving them a resource. You are giving them the resource at the exact moment the vulnerability is exposed, before the fire spreads.
That is a crucial distinction, and that actually brings us to the third pillar of the FAST pathway, which traditional school models almost always overlook.
And what's that?
Family inclusion. Parents must have access to the exact same support system, not just the student.
Really? Why is that so critical? Like, if the kid is getting professional therapy during the school day, isn't that fixing the primary issue?
Well, you have to think about the entire ecosystem of a child.
Right.
If a student receives excellent stabilizing support at 2 p.m., but then returns to a home environment at 5 p.m. that is completely unequipped to handle their needs,
Oh, I see.
the progress instantly unravels. The goal of this preventative model is equipping families before bedtime turns into a battle.
The bedtime battle.
Yeah, that's the phrase the sources use.
That is such an incredibly real phenomenon. Anyone who has ever cared for a dysregulated kid knows exactly what that looks like.
Oh, absolutely.
It's exhausting, it's highly emotional, and it fundamentally compounds the stress for the next school day. The kid wakes up tired, the parents are frustrated, and the cycle just continues.
Exactly. By extending the FAST pathway to the parents, you are fortifying the student's entire world, not just their math class.
You're stabilizing the ecosystem.
Yes, and that requires a shift from theory to practice. So how is this dual support, same-day, fast pathway, actually built in the real world?
Right, let's look at the operational layer. How does a program like MentalSpace School actually function in K-12 schools in Georgia? Let's walk through a concrete scenario for the listener.
Okay, let's do it.
Say a teacher, let's call him Mr. Davis, notices a sophomore, Sarah, has stopped turning in homework and is sleeping through class. What happens?
So in the mental space school architecture, Mr. Davis triggers the early warning system through a streamlined internal referral. And because they leverage same-day teletherapy, Sarah isn't put on a 3-month waiting list.
She doesn't go into the bureaucratic escape room.
Exactly. That very same day, during a free period or a designated time, Sarah can be sitting in a quiet, confidential room at school, speaking directly to a licensed therapist through a secure screen.
Wow. And to address my earlier skepticism, this isn't just whoever happens to be on shift at a national call center.
Right. They provide dedicated therapist teams for each individual school.
Dedicated teams, so they know the school.
Yes. That operational detail is what makes it clinical therapy rather than a hotline. The therapists aren't parachuting in blindly.
Right.
Because they are assigned to specific schools, they become intimately familiar with the culture of that building. They know the administration and they understand the ongoing social dynamics or challenges within that specific student body.
And they probably build a relationship with the school counselors, too.
Exactly. It builds trust, which is the absolute currency of effective therapy.
And they treat the whole ecosystem. The notes mention they provide crisis intervention, suicide prevention, and violence prevention.
Right.
They provide the family counseling to stop the bedtime battles.
Right.
But there's another piece to this that really fascinated me. Staff wellness.
Yes.
They actually provide support for the teachers themselves.
Which is huge. If you think about the architecture of this system, teachers are the frontline sensors. They are the ones detecting the check engine lights.
Right.
If the sensor is broken down by extreme stress, secondary trauma, or burnout, the warning light never gets reported.
Because the teacher is just trying to survive the day.
Exactly. Mental Space School supports the teachers before burnout becomes resignation. It is preventative care for the caregivers.
Which is desperately needed right now. There's also the element of who is actually providing the care. Mental Space School utilizes licensed, diverse therapists who are culturally competent.
Yes.
Why does that specific logistical choice matter so much for outcomes?
Well, imagine you are a high schooler in Georgia feeling deeply isolated or anxious. Sitting down with a therapist who culturally understands your background, your specific community dynamics, and your lived experience drastically reduces the friction of opening up.
It builds that trust faster.
Exactly. It ensures students feel fundamentally understood right out of the gate. That cultural competence is the difference between a student merely logging into a therapy session and a student actually engaging in the work.
But let's be pragmatic for a second.
Okay.
You and I both know that even the most brilliantly designed preventative clinic with dedicated teams, same-day access, and cultural competence fails completely if no one can afford to walk through the front door.
Oh, absolutely.
Or, if the school district gets sued because it violates a dozen medical privacy regulations.
Right.
We have to look at how a system like this breaks down the massive, very real barriers of cost and compliance. Because administrative friction is usually where good ideas go to die.
It is the absolute graveyard of innovation in education. Administrators are terrified of budget overruns and legal liability.
So let's start with the financial friction. How do they solve the cost barrier for families so that same-day access is actually accessible?
The insurance logistics are vital here.
Right. So for families on Medicaid, the out-of-pocket cost is exactly $0.
Wow.
Zero. That instantly removes the highest barrier for the most vulnerable populations in a school district. A parent doesn't have to choose between groceries and a therapy copay.
That's incredible.
But they don't stop there. They also accept a massive range of commercial providers. We're talking BCBS, Cigna, Aetna, UHC, Humana, Peach State, CareSource, and AmeriGroup.
So they're covering almost everyone.
Yeah, they have essentially cast the widest possible financial net so that when a student is in that critical window of need, money is removed from the equation entirely.
Okay, so that solves the friction for the parents.
Right.
But what about the school principal or the district superintendent?
Red tape.
The red tape. A school administrator's primary job, outside of education, is risk mitigation. They simply cannot adopt a program, no matter how life-saving it sounds, if it exposes the district to legal liability regarding student data.
Exactly. To function, this operational layer has to be bulletproof.
And it is. MentalSpace School is entirely HIPAA and FERPA compliant.
Okay, so it covers both sides.
Right, that protects the medical privacy of the students' health records and the educational privacy of their school records simultaneously. But there is a much more specific compliance issue driving this shift in Georgia right now.
Oh, right.
The program explicitly provides support for HB 268 compliance.
I saw that mentioned in the notes. What exactly does HB 268 require these schools to do? Because it sounds like a massive headache for principals.
Oh, it is a significant administrative burden. HB 268 is an impending legislative reality for Georgia schools with a strict deadline of July 2026.
July 2026. Okay.
And it isn't just a vague suggestion to, be safer. The bill requires schools to have concrete, documented threat assessment protocols and active, localized mental health interventions.
Wow. So you can't just call 911 after a crisis anymore.
No, you have to legally prove you have systems in place to assess and intervene beforehand.
So schools are being legally mandated to build these fast pathways.
Yes.
But they probably aren't being given a massive influx of cash or clinical staff to actually do it.
Exactly. They are in a complete bind. And that's where MentalSpace School acts as a turnkey compliance solution.
Oh, I see.
By integrating this system, the administration solves their legal headache and hits that July 2026 deadline at the exact same time they solve the student's clinical need.
That's brilliant. It aligns the legal mandate with actual human care.
Right?
It's treating the whole system again. The student gets the same-day help, the family gets ecosystem support, the teacher gets burnout prevention, and the stressed-out principal gets a robust framework that satisfies a looming legal deadline.
It covers all the bases.
It really does.
Huh?
But let's look at the actual proof. Because we can talk about systems and compliance and theories all day long.
Sure.
Does this preventative fast pathway model actually generate results?
Well, the data we are looking at proves a core concept. Prevention isn't dramatic, and that's exactly why it works.
When a system functions properly, you don't hear the sirens.
Exactly. Let's look at the metrics from this model.
The outcomes are honestly staggering. We are looking at 89% improved attendance,
Wow.
92% reduced anxiety, and 85% family satisfaction.
Those are massive numbers.
They are. And just as a quick side note for you listening, if you want to see the mechanics of how they achieve this yourself, you can look into mentalspaceschool.com or reach out to them at mentalspaceschool@cheatsheettherapy.com. But I want to play skeptic again for a second.
Okay, go for it.
89% better attendance and 92% less anxiety. Those numbers sound almost like marketing fluff. How is a 92% reduction in anxiety even possible just from an operational shift?
It sounds like magic until you realize what the alternative is.
Okay.
It's not that the therapy itself is magic, it's the timing.
The speed.
Yes. Remember the bureaucratic escape room? When a student has to wait 3 months for an appointment, their anxiety doesn't stay static.
No, it gets worse.
It snowballs. A 92% reduction in anxiety is what happens when you treat a psychological paper cut the day it happens, rather than waiting 3 months to treat a systemic infection.
Oh, that makes total sense.
And that 92% reduction isn't just a neat metric on a spreadsheet to make administrators happy. It is a fundamental change in the trajectory of a human life.
Absolutely.
A student with severe, untreated anxiety cannot learn. They don't socialize healthily, they don't sleep, and they are at a drastically higher risk for entering that exact crisis state we talked about at the beginning of our deep dive.
Right.
Reducing that anxiety simply by removing the wait time and providing culturally competent same-day help, it proves definitively that the old comforting story of the inevitable, unpredictable crisis is largely an excuse.
It's an excuse for a broken logistical system. It shows that when you take the car to the shop, the minute the check engine light comes on, the engine doesn't explode on the highway.
It's a simple mechanical truth.
Which is maybe why it took us so long to apply it to something as complex as a school district.
Yeah. We spent decades trying to build a better, faster emergency room, completely failing to realize we just needed a more efficient pathway to the preventative clinic.
Exactly. So, for you listening, let's summarize the core revelation we've uncovered in today's deep dive.
Okay.
The absolute strongest safety net you can provide for a student is the one they never actually have to fall into.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. By shifting our focus away from the loud, dramatic, after-the-fact crisis response and investing deeply in the unglamorous, highly logistical operational layer of same-day preventative care, we change the game.
We really do.
Schools can catch the warning signs early, they can support the teachers, equip the families to win the bedtime battles, and quite literally change the trajectory of a student's life.
And as we wrap up, this operational shift raises an important question for you to consider long after you finish listening today.
What's that?
Well, we've seen how undeniably true this model is in K-12 education. But if the signs of a crisis are visible months in advance, and the real barrier to preventing disaster is simply the logistical friction of connecting a person to a professional,
Right.
how many other massive societal crises in our world are we treating as inevitable disasters when they are actually just failures of connection?
Wow. That is exactly the kind of perspective shift we love to leave you with. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking for those preventative systems in your own life. Keep questioning the comforting myths. And most importantly, stay curious.